Thank you. Thank you. The reason that I created this podcast is because I want to feel better. So many of the right-wing talk show hosts that I've listened to over the years make me feel worse, more anxious, more fearful, angrier. And I want to feel better, and I want the people who listen to my podcast to feel better after having listened to it than they did at the beginning.
One of the more mind-blowing stories of this year was about the internet celebrity Mr. Beast and how he was always getting raked over the coals for a series of charitable endeavors. Last month, Mr. Beast, in another dick move, funded the construction of 100 wells across 5 countries in Africa to provide clean drinking water to 500,000 people. Good thing, right? No. The founder of a charity called Face Africa called it kind of frustrating that overnight this person comes along who happens to be a white male figure with a huge platform, and all of a sudden he gets all of the attention. Another thing this asshole did in Africa was pay for the rebuilding of an African orphanage, which the director of the Hope and Homes for Children charity called it a classic case of white saviorism. How did we get to this weird place? Telling people who are actually out in the world making a positive difference you're the problem.
Not agree.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Management Wednesday, May the 8th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Patriotic Song of the Day, we will have the Patriotic Shorts, Motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and Management of the Absurd. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now a little something from the 10th Amendment Center, also known as the TAC. It's called Protecting Privacy with the Founders' Strategy, 11 Years of Small Wins, a Robust Foundation for Rejecting the Surveillance State. Last week, a Utah law putting limits on warrantless biometric surveillance went into effect. This is another advance in Utah's step-by-step approach to protect privacy and limit the surveillance state that should absolutely be replicated in the other 49. The new law prohibits government entities, including law enforcement agencies, from obtaining biometric surveillance information without a warrant. This includes iris scans, voice recognition, heart rate scanners, software that analyzes a person's gait or distinctive movements, etc. This new law is the 8th passed in Utah in the last decade, closely tracking the founders' advice and strategy for moving things forward in support of the Constitution and liberty. As Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1790, the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. We must be contented to secure the liberty we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. And that was the 10th Amendment Center. They have a free newsletter that you can get. Look it up on the internet at 10th Amendment Center or TAC. And again, this is Protecting Privacy with the Founders' Strategy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, cars.
In the late 1960s, there was once a street race in the Northeast for $250,000. The quarter-mile race was set up to determine which crew had the fastest cars on the streets of New York. In the right lane was a Camaro piloted by Super John McFadden and was powered by a 488 cubic inch big block set up by the one and only Mr. Chevrolet, Dick Carroll himself. In the left lane was a Hemi Dart run by a racing club called the Mud Brothers, consisting of legendary drag racer Ronald Biles and his brother John, aka Mud, along with their mechanic Benny Dunham. It was one of only 80 LO2368 Hemi Darts. Each crew would put up $125,000, and the race was a one-shot winner-take-all near the Kennedy Airport, drawing a crowd of more than 5,000 people. At the start of the race, the Camaro pulled a half a car length on the wheel-standing Dodge, but once the Elephant engine got comfortable in fourth gear, it stormed by the heavier Camaro. The Superstock Dart is rumored to be undefeated in the streets of Brooklyn, and the total prize money would be worth over $2 million today.
Our dealership was owned by an ex-boxer. And this dude, he's big, muscly guy. He's an older guy. And he's been hit so many times in the head. Like his speech is slurred. Like the cauliflower ear, the whole shooting match. And he comes in, the dry erase board with all the lines. My name's down there 8 times.
Who's this Rabbit guy?
I wrote my name so fast on the dry erase board, Robert looked like Rabbit to him. And
I don't know who he is, but he sells a lot of cars.
And he said, that's just one day? You didn't wipe this thing off the other day? And never met the man before in my life till then. And it was so funny. My very next day, they gave me my own little glass office. They had on the window Rabbit pits. And to this day, the owner and his son still call me Rabbit.
Anyways, what we're looking at here is not just one, but 2 Honda K24 engines stuck together with a custom-made block to create one Honda K48 V8 engine. But this engine is a lot more than just a custom-made block with 2 Honda heads attached to it and smashed together and just made to work. This entire thing, from top to bottom, is designed with cost, weight, and performance in mind. You see, one of Craig's goals with the K48 is to make it as affordable as possible to one day sell this as a kit to basically whoever wants to buy it. And with that came some unique choices, such as using non-mirrored Honda heads. The reason for this design is that one of the heads has to be flipped in order to have the exhaust ports in the center of the V. Rather than designing this engine with a very expensive custom-designed cylinder head for one side of the engine, Craig opted to use 2 stock Honda heads and simply turn one around in order to save cost. And that's just one of the many wild features that you'll find on this engine. And in total, this engine has gone through about a dozen massive and major redesigns to get to the point that it's at now.
I bought this van for $375, and that's with the auction fees. And my mom found these old windows. Well, the guy that I had running my sign shop said, man, how cool that thing be lettered up. Well, it took off. where did you even get this window at? She said, well, there's a salvage building place down here in Seneca, which is where their house is at in South Carolina. This man had a 53-foot trailer full of these windows. They all came out of a plant that was tore down, and he's had them for about 20 years. I said, how much do you want for the whole trailer? And he gave me a price that was just crazy. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. I do need a good little van, though, something to get around in. So I traded the Caravan for a trailer load of windows. And we started Window to the Heart. I was on 3 news channels. I did 4 Christmas festivals in one season. People were buying them for like weddings, to use in their wedding pictures or put behind the wedding cake, hang up in their house. In about 5 months, that little Caravan made me about $80,000 when it was all cleared.
I got an email out of the blue. It said, hey, would you sell carsforstars.com? And if so, for how much? He says, well, I'll give you $500. I'm like, nope. So I countered at $325K. So he got all pissed off. That's a crazy offer. It's not worth that. You're dreaming. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But so was $500. I sent my second counter offer. He got very aggressive. If you don't take it for $5,000, I'm going to sue you and we're just going to own it. Let's start this conversation over. Make me a reasonable counter offer. And he couldn't help himself. He immediately went back to, oh, well, look at this other guy. We had offered $5,000 and he didn't take it. And we just took it from him in court. So I still own carsforstars.com. While I'd like to say that my pride doesn't have a price, it absolutely does. And my price at the moment for anybody but the original guy who made me the offer is $4,000 if they could actually tell me what fun they had messing with the guy who didn't end up buying it.
The Pagani Zonda, a car which proves that in Italy you can wake up one morning, drink 1 too many espressos, tell the world you're going to make a car as fast and as good as a Ferrari, and then actually go ahead and do it. This particular version, one of a baffling array of Zondas over the years, is a road-going version of the feral, track-only Zonda R. It's always puzzled us how Pagani makes its cars so good. Yes, they put in the effort by inventing a new cocktail of carbon fiber and titanium called carbotanium. And they managed to persuade Merck's power-crazed AMG division to build them special V12 engines. But that's not enough on its own. What Pagani really understand is that a supercar should be loud and dramatic. Many men in sheds try to make supercars, and they get it wrong. But Pagani, as we see here, consistently gets it right.
One of the most annoying things about the 3.5-liter EcoBoost built from 2011 to 2016 is coolant fittings on the turbo. We have these quick connect fittings for coolant entering and exiting our turbocharger, extend on the coolant lines and run all the way up here to the cylinder head. The other one runs into the block. But you see this crusty stuff that's all over both of these. See all that crusty stuff? That is coolant leaking from these fittings. How we replace these, I pull the cab because I don't kill myself trying to access these things. Inside of this little fitting, we have an O-ring. Over time, they just rust, corrode, and they start to leak. Main issue with these coolant fittings is everything else that surrounds them. To replace all of these fittings, we have to remove the turbocharger. And when we remove the turbocharger, we have to replace these manifolds because they're absolute garbage. Usually these bolts break in them, and they've updated it to have an extra bolt on the back so it doesn't break. This is an extremely expensive repair, and it is probably the most aggravating thing about the Ford 3.5-liter EcoBoost.
It seems like a huge risk buying an $80,000 brand new vehicle from an unknown manufacturer like this Ineos Grenadier. But there are a couple of things that give me a lot of peace of mind. First of all, the engine is a 3-liter inline 6 manufactured by BMW, and this engine is used in a ton of cars, including a Toyota, the Supra. But what makes me feel even more confident is that this vehicle is engineered in large part by a company called Magna, one of the largest engineering firms in the planet. So that engine is a BMW engine, but the transfer case, the transmission are all tuned by Magna. It's a ZF 8-speed, by the way, and a Tremec transfer case. Once again, really big names. And a lot of the underside chassis suspension development also done in a large part by Magna. So yes, it is a relatively unknown manufacturer, but a lot of the stuff that makes it tick is done by a huge name in engineering.
And I come into an intersection and I'm already sliding sideways as I come in. I've already set the car up, and I come into the intersection completely sideways. And as I enter the intersection, there's a cop sitting right there. So at this point, if I lift off the throttle, I'm spinning mid-intersection. So I'm committed, man. I'm full. What? smoke billowing off the wheel wells. And as soon as I gather the car back up and go past him, on the brakes and pull over, shut the car off, lights on, you know the drill, windows down, heads up on top of the wheel, pulls up right behind me, sits there for a long, uncomfortable amount of time, gets out, walks up to the car with his hand very much on his holster, and walks up, starts giving me what I deserve, basically. Son, what do you think you're doing? Da-da-da, this and that. Has us step out of the car and asked me what I was doing. I said, honestly, sir, I'm out with my friends. They asked me to give them a ride. And I said, a good song came on, and we were rocking out. And he starts laughing. He goes, you're going with the good song defense, huh? And I just sat there and looked back at him. He checked my license, made sure I didn't have any warrants, let me go.
And that was Cars. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the military shorts.
I had 2 deployments. My first one in 2011 was to Iraq, and my second deployment was to Afghanistan in 2013. They were like polar opposite deployments. My Iraq deployment was like pretty cool guy, sexy especially for a new guy. I got volunteered to run like an intelligence network of local dudes every day, like gathering information so that way at night we could go out and operate in crash houses. And every night the platoon was going out and like capturing people in their beds. I remember my buddy Mike and I went into a room and there were 3 Iraqis laying down asleep and we were dead silent. Like the whole house was dead silent. The door was unlocked and we come creeping in. We L-shape walk into this room, 3 dudes sleeping next to each other, and Mike sticks his suppressor like in the guy's mouth and he's like, wake the up. And I remember just being like, yes, like this is awesome.
Which U.S. military training program is the hardest? Some of these programs can reach levels of insanity that most people cannot even imagine. Special Forces take the 3rd place. If you excel at basic training, you can be selected for Special Forces Division. You will learn there to parachute into combat zones, asymmetrical warfare, and survival training in hostile territories. Less than 5% of applicants finish the training. The Navy SEALs rank 2nd, arguably the toughest physical and mental training in the world. The famous BUDS have only 25% of success rate, and BUDS is just 6-month-long introduction to 12-month proper training. 11 people died just in BUDS training so far. If you pass BUDS, you will learn underwater demolition, scuba operations, and parachute training. Less than 3% of applicants finish the training. Delta Force training is the most elite counter-terrorist and direct action unit in the U.S. military. To join, you will need to be recommended and have field experience from other special units. You need to be already a world-class athlete and a master of other special forces. You know now.
Did you know in the film 1917, there's a scene that underscores the brutal reality of World War I's trench warfare? Lieutenant Leslie issues a stern warning to the soldiers.
Watch out for the craters. They're deeper than they look. If you fall in, there's no getting out.
This cautionary advice is not merely tactical, but a matter of life and death. The craters he refers to are the result of heavy artillery shelling. These craters often filled with water due to rain or the high water table on the Western Front, especially in the region of Passchendaele, which was notorious for its muddy conditions. On the surface, these water-filled craters might seem like mere obstacles, but they posed a lethal trap for the soldiers.
What happened to German soldiers after World War II? Many German soldiers were taken as prisoners of war by the Allied forces. They were held in various internment camps across Europe and were gradually released after the war's end. Individuals accused of war crimes, including German soldiers, were subject to trials. Some German soldiers were interned in Allied-occupied territories for a certain period before being repatriated to Germany.
My buddy stops, Shuey. He's leading the patrol, and he takes a knee, and I get over and take a knee next to a tree, and he looks back at me. He just looks at me, he goes, "Do you hear that?" And I kind of just lean in, and that's when it all kicks off. You know, Allah Akbar, and all hell breaks loose. The tree explodes next to me, just rapid machine gun fire shooting right down into us. And I took shrapnel to the eye and my face. That was the first time I was wounded in the battle. I ended up taking shrapnel along my nose, my face, my eye. I almost lost my eye. cut my face, everything like that. And then we returned fire, just volleyed fire back. So it was just volleyed fire just going back and forth. Had to get them off our back. My radio's gone. I can't communicate. You know, we're in the middle of this valley, surrounded on all sides, and that's when everything really opened up. And that's when they really started to hit us. And I just remember saying to myself, "You're not dead yet, so keep fighting." That was it. That's all that went through my head.
And that was the Military Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little bit of motivation.
There's a profound truth that many fear to acknowledge, that the most formative battles are fought alone, away from the eyes of the world, in the hushed serenity of solitude. It is there in the darkness of the night that I waged my wars, without fanfare, without witnesses. I tell you this not to seek your pity, for there is no sorrow in my solitude, but to ignite a spark of rebellion against the comforting lies of daylit camaraderie. The night, with its unyielding silence, does not seduce with sweet words or promises of glory. Instead, it challenges you with its void, asking, "Who are you when no one is watching?" I embraced that challenge while others lay asleep, dreaming of their aspirations. I was awake, actively sculpting my reality from the shadows. The darkness was not my enemy, but my ally, for it stripped away the distractions of the daylight, allowing a pure focus that is not afforded to those who fear to tread away from the sun. In the solitude of the night, I learned the hard truths of self-reliance. There were no hands to hold, no cheers to spur me on, only the relentless echo of my own heartbeat, urging me not to falter, not to relent. I discovered that true growth, real enduring growth, comes when you're too far in the depths to see the surface. Let me be clear, when you embark on your journey in the dead of night, you will encounter moments of doubt and despair, when the darkness feels more like a shroud than a shield. In those moments, remember that it's only in the deepest dark that the stars shine brightest. Your eyes will adjust, your senses will sharpen, and what was once hidden in the night will come brilliantly to life. So to those who find themselves standing on the edge of their own daunting nights, I say, do not fear the solitude. Embrace it. Harness it. Let it teach you who you truly are when stripped of the day's comforting illusions. And when you finally emerge from the night, having fought your battles away from the applause and the acclaim, you will know the profound satisfaction that comes not from external validation, but from the undeniable truth that you did it alone. As I stand here tonight, sharing this moment with you, under the flicker of these dim lights, know that my journey through the night has been my greatest teacher. It can be yours too. Let the darkness be not your prison, but your cocoon. For only in the solitude of its embrace can you truly transform. And when you emerge, as I have, you will not just say, "I survived the night." You will declare, "In the darkness of the night, I was reborn. I did it alone, and therein lies my power." Now, let me tell you this. The path of solitude is not merely about enduring. It is about mastering the art of thriving in the absence of light. It is about finding your own rhythm in the silence, your own pace in the stillness. Each step taken in the darkness hones your will, sharpens your spirit, because every decision, every movement is yours and yours alone. The world teaches us to fear isolation, to seek constant companionship, to drown out our inner voices with the noise of the crowd. But there is a potent, undeniable power in learning to stand completely alone. In the darkness, stripped of all distractions, You are the architect of your destiny. Each moment of solitude is a brush stroke on the canvas of your life, painted without guidance, forged without consensus. In the night, every whisper of doubt must be confronted and conquered by none but yourself. There is no place to hide from your fears, no shadows deep enough to conceal your insecurities. It is here, in this stark reality, that you face the ultimate test of your resolve. And when you pass this test, as you surely must, you forge an indomitable spirit, capable of weathering any storm. This journey of mine through the deep night has been a crucible. The lessons learned in its depths are etched into my soul, not just as memories, but as cornerstones of my very being. These lessons have shaped me into a relentless force, a solitary titan walking confidently through the shadows, knowing that the night no longer holds dominion over my fate. So to you, standing at the precipice of your own dark nights, I offer not comfort, but a challenge. Seek not the light for safety, but embrace the darkness for the profound clarity it can provide. Let the quiet of the night teach you about your true potential, which lies buried beneath layers of societal expectation and self-doubt. Discover your strength in the solitude of the night, and let that discovery echo through every aspect of your life. Step into the darkness. Let it envelop you, test you, change you. Then, and only then, can you truly understand the power of your own light. A light that is not dimmed by the coming of the dawn, but is instead defined by it. And when dawn does come, as it inevitably will, you will step into the light, not as a survivor of the night, but as its conqueror. You will step forward not seeking validation, for you have proved everything that ever needed proving to yourself in the darkest hours. You will know the profound peace that comes from having faced the abyss and having found not emptiness, but an unshakable core of resolve and strength. Remember, the night does not need to be your enemy, nor does it need to be your grave. It can be your sanctuary, your workshop, your proving ground. Embrace it fully and let it transform you. Then emerge from it not just victorious, but transformed, enlightened by your own courage, and fortified by your solitary conquests. Stand tall, embrace your journey, and let the world see what wonders can be wrought in the darkness of the night. For those who dare to walk alone, find not just paths but horizons that others never will.
And that was motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Daily Dad for May the 8th.
May 8th. Punishment should make them better.
To punish others is like putting more wood in the fire. Every crime already has punishment in itself, and it is more cruel and more just than the punishment created by people. Leo Tolstoy.
Randall Stutman is asked a lot about parenting by the CEOs and executives with whom he works as a leadership coach. We already know his admonition about making fast transitions from work and home, but he has another piece of advice for high-powered leaders who also want to be great parents. Punishment, he said, should make them better. It's pretty fitting advice coming from a coach, too. Think about it. A basketball coach who is disappointed in someone's effort makes them do sprints or push-ups. It's not fun, and it makes the kid stronger. A football player who doesn't make their GPA has to go to extra study sessions. An athlete who gets in trouble off the court might have to do community service or write an apology letter. These are more than just simple deterrents. They're punishments that make the transgressors better, both as people and as players. When you get upset, when you catch your kids doing something they're not supposed to do, make sure you don't punish them from a place of heightened emotion, whether that's anger or fear or shame. Take a minute, come up with a punishment that makes them better, something they wouldn't choose to do, but is good for them. Vocab drills, memorizing state capitals, volunteering somewhere, picking up trash, painting the house. They won't like it, but one day they might actually thank you for it.
So he says punishment should make them better. I suppose, but it's up to the individual. Punishment isn't going to make anybody do anything. There are people that get punished and then they continue to go out and make the same mistakes over and over again. And the Leo Tolstoy quote was crap. He was completely and utterly wrong. Punishment and reward are protean. You cannot create or destroy them. You can only change their form. In any situation, somebody gets rewarded, somebody is going to get punished. The only question is, will the right person get rewarded and the right person get punished? Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Bishop Robert Barron.
People say, okay, well, Bishop, how do you argue? Can I propose a little two-step? And it's inspired by Thomas Aquinas. Someone makes a claim, right, against something you believe. Here's the first step. Identify something in that claim that's right. Because invariably there will be, unless the person is completely insane. Begin not with, you're an idiot, shut up. But begin with, yeah, you know what, actually, something you're saying here is true. Here's the second little simple move. Distinguish. Make the distinction that brings out where you think what you're saying is true over and against the claim they're making. It's a little two-step dance. Acknowledge the truth of it, make the distinction. Now watch something here. Instead of simply fighting, you say A, I say not A, and bap, 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 we fight. What I proposed is like a little dance. We'll take two steps together. We're kind of dancing, I hope, in the direction of the truth. We're actually moving together toward something beyond both of us, which is the fullness of truth. That's called argument. Friendship.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. And no, not quite. The way it really works is first thing you have to do if you're going to get into an argument is you've got to make sure that you're talking about the same thing. So you agree on the vocabulary. What are the important words and what do they mean? And decide how you're going to settle that kind of an argument with the dictionary, say. The next thing that you do is you decide what's going to settle your argument. The example is that I had an argument with some people about exactly when it was that the United States entered World War II, and I said it was 1940, they said it was 1941, and we went back and forth, and they said, let's do it this way, let's call the library and ask them, and let's agree that whatever the library says, we will agree to. And so I said, fine. So there we go. We've agreed as to where to go to settle the argument, how to settle the argument. We could have also said, let's go to the Encyclopedia Britannica, which that was often a argument settler. When we were kids, smaller kids, we would agree mom or dad will settle the argument, or the teacher will settle the argument. Whatever the teacher says, we both agree will end the argument one way or another. That's the way you do it. You don't have to do dancing. And when he's talking about clashing, he's talking about dialectic. That's Marxist. The Marxists believe in clashing and arguing about everything. Arguing forever. Never agreeing on anything. Never coming to terms. Nothing. And that's no good either. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, the only actual factor required for the existence of free competition is the unhampered, unobstructed operation of the mechanism of a free market. The only action which a government can take to protect free competition is laissez-faire, which in free translation means hands off, unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you need to vote Republican because the Democrats don't care about their constituents, but the Republicans do. The evidence of that is in the House of Representatives, where the Democrats all act in unison, unified. You never hear them talking about or against other members of their caucus. Everybody's unified. They're all marching in lockstep. Whereas the Republicans have a tendency to bicker and whatnot. That's because the Republicans know that it's the House of Representatives, and the Democrats think it's the House of Democrats and Republicans, and they think they're there to represent their party and not necessarily their constituents. So again, if you want to be represented, you need to quit the Democrat Party and vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 25, Deny Them Targets from the 33 Strategies of War.
Chapter 26, Deny Them Targets. The Strategy of the Void. The feeling of emptiness or void, silence, isolation, non-engagement with others, is for most people intolerable. As a human weakness, that fear offers fertile ground for a powerful strategy. Give your enemies no target to attack. Be dangerous, but elusive and invisible. Then watch as they chase you into the void. This is the essence of guerrilla warfare. Instead of frontal battles, deliver irritating but damaging side attacks and pinprick bites. Frustrated at their inability to use their strength against your vaporous campaign, your opponents will grow irrational and exhausted. Make your guerrilla war part of a grand political cause, a people's war, that crests in an irresistible revolution. The Lure of the Void. In 1807, Napoleon Bonaparte of France and Tsar Alexander I of Russia signed a treaty of alliance. Now the period's two great military powers were linked. But this treaty was unpopular with the Russian court. Among other things, it allowed Napoleon nearly free rein in Poland, Russia's traditional front yard. Russian aristocrats worked to influence the Tsar to repudiate it. Before too long, Alexander began to take actions that he knew would displease the French, and by August 1811, Napoleon had had enough. It was time to teach Russia a lesson. He began to lay plans for an invasion. The acquisition of this vast territory to the east would make him the ruler of the largest empire in history. Some of Napoleon's ministers warned him of the dangers of invading such a vast country, but the Emperor General felt supremely confident. The Russian army was undisciplined, and its officers were squabbling among themselves. Two forces in Lithuania were positioned to block an invasion from the west, but intelligence had revealed that they were unprepared. Napoleon would march into a central position between these forces and defeat them in detail. He would ensure victory by mobilizing an army 3 times larger than any he had previously led. 650,000 men would march into Russia, 450,000 as part of the main attack force, the rest to secure lines of communication and supply. With an army this size, he could dominate even the large spaces of Russia, overwhelming the feeble enemy not only with his usual brilliant maneuvers, but with superior firepower. Napoleon may have felt certain of victory, but he was not a reckless man. As always, he studied the situation from every angle. He knew, for instance, that Russian roads were notoriously bad. Local food supplies were meager. The climate tended to extremes of heat and cold, and the vast distances made it much harder to encircle the enemy. There was always room to retreat. He read up on the failed invasion of Russia by the King of Sweden, Charles XII, in 1709, and anticipated that the Russians might revert to a scorched earth policy. His army would have to be as self-sufficient as possible. The distances were too great to have extended supply lines from Europe. But given its size, that would require incredible planning and organization. To help provide for his army, Napoleon had vast storehouses close to the borders of Russia filled with wheat and rice. He knew it would be impossible to provide fodder for the 150,000 horses of his army, and so thinking ahead, he decided they would have to wait until June for the invasion, when the grasses of the Russian plains would be rich and green. At the last minute, he learned Russia had very few mills to grind grain into flour, so he added to his growing list the need to bring materials to build mills along the way. With the logistical problems addressed and his usual well-devised strategy in hand, Napoleon told his ministers that he foresaw complete victory within 3 weeks. In the past, these predictions of Napoleon's had been uncannily accurate. In June 1812, Napoleon's vast armada of men and supplies crossed into Russia. Napoleon always planned for the unexpected, but this time, unmanageable difficulties began to pile up almost immediately. Rain, the bad roads, the intense summer heat brought the army's movements to a crawl. Within days, more than 10,000 horses ate rank grass and died. Supplies were failing to reach the forward troops fast enough, and they had to resort to foraging. But the uncooperative Russian peasants along the march not only refused to sell their food at any price, but burned their hay rather than let the French have it. More French horses died when they were forced to feed off the thatch in the roofs of houses, only to find the houses collapsing on them. The 2 Russian armies in Lithuania retreated too fast to be caught, and as they went, they burned crops and destroyed all storehouses of food. Dysentery quickly spread through the French troops. Some 900 men died each day. In his effort to catch and destroy at least a part of his elusive enemy, Napoleon was compelled to march ever farther east. At points he came tantalizingly close to the more northern of the 2 Russian armies, but his exhausted men and horses could not move fast enough to meet or encircle it, and it easily escaped his traps each time. June bled into July. Now it became clear that the Russians would be able to join their 2 armies at Smolensk, over 200 miles east of where Napoleon had intended to fight them, and a mere 280 miles from Moscow. Napoleon had to call a halt and rethink his plan. Thousands of French soldiers had succumbed to disease and hunger without a single battle being fought. The army was strung out along a 500-mile line, parts of which were constantly harassed by small troops of Cossacks on horseback, sowing terror with their bloodthirsty raids. Napoleon could not allow the chase to go on any longer. He would march his men to Smolensk and fight the decisive battle there. Smolensk was a holy city with great emotional significance to the Russian people. Surely the Russians would fight to defend it rather than let it be destroyed. He knew that if he could only meet the Russians in battle, he would win. And so the French moved on Smolensk, arriving there in mid-August, their 450,000-man attack force reduced to 150,000 and worn down by the intense heat. Finally, as Napoleon had predicted, the Russians made a stand here, but only briefly. After several days of fighting, they retreated yet again, leaving behind a burned and ruined city with nothing in it to feed on or plunder. Napoleon could not understand the Russian people, who seemed to him suicidal. They would destroy their country rather than surrender it. Now he had to decide whether to march on Moscow itself. It might have seemed wise to wait through the winter at Smolensk, but that would give the Tsar time to raise a larger army that would prove too hard for Napoleon to handle with his own depleted forces. The French emperor felt certain the Tsar would defend Moscow, the very heart and soul of Russia. Once Moscow fell, Alexander would have to sue for peace. So Napoleon marched his haggard troops still farther east. Now, at last, the Russians turned to face the French in battle. And on September 7th, the 2 armies clashed near the village of Borodino, a mere 75 miles from Moscow. Napoleon no longer had enough forces or cavalry to attempt his usual flanking maneuver, so he was forced to attack the enemy head-on. The Russians fought bitterly, harder than any army Napoleon had ever faced. Even so, after hours of brutal fighting, the Russians retreated yet again. The road to Moscow lay open, but the Russian army was still intact, and Napoleon's forces had suffered horrific casualties. 7 days later, Napoleon's army, now reduced to 100,000 men, straggled into an undefended Moscow. A French marshal wrote to his wife that the emperor's joy was overflowing. The Russians, he thinks, will sue for peace, and I shall change the face of the world. In earlier years, when he had marched into Vienna and Berlin, he had been met as a conquering hero, with dignitaries turning over to him the keys to their cities. But Moscow was empty. No citizens, no food. A terrible fire broke out almost immediately and lasted 5 days. All of the city's water pumps had been removed. An elaborate sabotage to make Moscow still more inhospitable. Napoleon sent letters to the Tsar, offering generous terms of peace. At first, the Russians seemed willing to negotiate, but the weeks went by, and it finally became clear that they were dragging out the talks to buy time to build up their army, and to let winter grow closer. Napoleon could not risk staying in Moscow another day. The Russians would soon be able to encircle his now meager force. On October 19th, he marched the remains of his army out of the Russian capital. His goal was to get to Smolensk as fast as possible. Now those undisciplined bands of Cossacks that had harassed him on the road east had formed into larger divisions, guerrilla forces of 500 men, and every day they killed off more and more French soldiers. Marching in constant fear, Napoleon's men rarely slept. Thousands succumbed to fatigue and hunger. Napoleon was forced to lead them past the nightmarish fields of Borodino, still crowded with French corpses, many half-eaten by wolves. The snow began to fall. The Russian winter set in. The French horses died from the cold, and every last soldier had to trudge through the snow on foot. Barely 40,000 made it to Smolensk. The cold was worsening. There was no time to tarry in Smolensk. Through some deft maneuvering, Napoleon managed to get his troops across the Berezina River, allowing them a clear line of retreat to the west. Then, in early December, hearing of a failed coup d'etat at home in France, he left his troops behind and headed for Paris. Of the 450,000 men in his main attack force, some 25,000 made it back. Few among the rest of the army survived as well. Napoleon had miraculously escaped to fight more wars, but he would never recoup his losses in manpower and horses. Russia was indeed his grave.
And that was the beginning of chapter 26, Deny Them Targets, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I've got a clip here of Sebastian Gorka, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, one of the right-wing talk show hosts that, anyways, he is being interviewed by CNN. Why the hell he's decided to go ahead and be interviewed by CNN, God only knows. But anyway, so he's being interviewed by CNN. I want you to hear this because I'm going to tell you how he screwed it up.
Mr. Gorka, I want to ask you about something that's been in the news for the past 2 days, and that, of course, is Don Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer who seemed to be offering up some sort of damaging information about Hillary Clinton. Was it a good idea for Don Jr. to meet with this Russian lawyer?
Was it a good idea for the DNC to send its operatives to the Ukrainian embassy?
I'm not sure that answers
opposition.
my question.
No, if there's a meeting that was wholly appropriate, but which led to nothing, let's compare that to the DNC sending its people to the Ukrainian embassy to coordinate Oppo attacks against our candidate. I mean, if you want to see collusion, it's in the DNC.
So,
it is
but
up
you're,
to
okay,
their necks.
so just let me follow your line of logic. You're saying it's inappropriate for the Democrats to meet with a foreign country, Ukraine, but it's not inappropriate for your campaign, for Donald Trump, to meet with the Russians.
What do you mean the Russians? Who did this woman work for at the time? Do you know?
Well, this is the question, Mr. Gorka. I mean, this is what investigators are obviously trying to. What is the answer? What is her connection to the Kremlin?
There was no connection. She was a private lawyer who had an interest with regards to the Russian adoption program and used a pretext to get a meeting with the campaign, which the campaign representatives almost immediately realized was not done in good faith, that she had another agenda.
That's right,
and therefore the meeting ended.
What's funny, Mr. Gorka, is that they wanted the original agenda. They wanted the dirt.
Which is what political...
So I'm going to stop it there because it goes on for about 5 minutes. And he screwed this up. He completely screwed this up. First thing that she said is, I want to ask you about something that's been widely reported in the news. And he accepted that. The first thing you have to do with these people is you question their premise. Once you've questioned their premise, they're screwed. She didn't provide any evidence that this has been widely covered anywhere, media or non-media or anything. She doesn't cite her sources, nothing. So that means her claim is arbitrary. And what that means is that you have the option of accepting her arbitrary claim, or you have the option of disregarding it or denying it. For instance, somebody comes into my house and says, hey, Ron, you better grab an umbrella because it's raining outside. That's an arbitrary claim. They've offered no proof of that. So I can either go ahead and grab an umbrella and take their word for it, or I can go and check myself. Now, in this particular case, what he should have said was, as soon as she said, well, this has been widely reported in the news, is he should have said, no, it isn't. She stopped right there because now she's going to have to prove that this was widely reported in the news. And there's no way out of it. So handling it the way he did is he creates now the moral equivalency argument. It's okay for the Republicans to do it, or kind of a hypocrisy argument where it's okay for the Republicans to do it, but it's not okay for the Democrats to do it. And we get into this big convoluted argument. He ends up looking bad. The Republicans end up looking bad, and they didn't have to. Always start with the premise. Whenever somebody's saying, well, I heard, no, you didn't. Okay? I heard this somebody said that you blah, 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 blah. No, they didn't. That's right where you start if you want to shut it down. Because if you admit that they say, if you go ahead and somebody says, well, let's say your supervisor comes in, sits you down and says, I got a complaint that you did X, Y, Z. You say, no, you didn't. Because he didn't offer you any proof. Where's the proof? Okay. I have heard that somebody complained about you today. But is that person there in the room? No. So you can say, sorry, no, they didn't. No, you didn't. You received no complaint. If you don't, you're conceding that it's possible that somebody has complained about you, right? For instance, if you say, well, about what, where, when, you're conceding that it's possible that you are routinely out making mistakes or doing things that are causing people to complain about you. Okay, so if you shut it down by simply denying the premise, now they got to start from the beginning. They're going to have to go out and prove that they got the complaint, or in this particular case, prove that this was a news item. Even before we get to the issue of whether or not, because the other issue is, this is a news item, so you shut that down. If you don't want to shut that down, or you miss the opportunity to do that, then when she says, the report is that this lady lawyer for the RNC met with a Putin operative. No, there isn't. That's what you say. There is no such report. Make them prove it, make them prove it, make them prove it. Never concede anything with the left. Once you concede something, you've created a foundation, and then you're screwed. Okay? So again, one more time is Sebastian Gorka, Dr. Gorka should have said, when she said, it's been widely reported in the news, no, it hasn't. And that stops her right there cold. Actually, what he really should have done was not be interviewed by this boob in the first place. I don't understand why Republicans do it. Why they insist on being stupid. It must be because they're selling books. That's the only thing I think. Maybe Dr. Sebastian Gorka is selling books, and so CNN says, okay, come on our show to sell your book. Oh, by the way, since you're here, maybe it's that kind of thing. So maybe it's greed on his part, or maybe it's just sheer stupidity. Because, I mean, what do you expect to get from CNN if you're a Republican? You expect to get straight questions? No, you're going to get gotcha questions every single time. So, number one, avoid it. Don't go on CNN. Number two, if you absolutely have to for whatever reason, deny the premise. Then you don't have to bother with all the rest of it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Management of the Absurd by Richard Farson, Chapter 3, and this is Part 2, by the way, The Technology of Human Relations. Chapter 3, the more important a relationship, the less skill matters. America is a nation obsessed by technology. We have benefited from so many technological successes that we are now willing, even eager, to apply technology to every area of our lives, even the most personal, such as romance, marriage, and parenthood. When I say that we apply technology in those areas, I mean that increasingly we treat human relationships as requiring skill and technique. Thus, it is only natural that we have come to regard the job of a manager as essentially the acquisition of techniques we call management skills. Hundreds of millions of dollars are spent annually in teaching these skills to managers. Of course, skills are necessary in management. Gaining skill in planning, organizing, and scheduling no doubt improves the performance of managers. It is when we attempt to apply skills to the most challenging area of management, that of human relations, that they desert us. This is especially true when we try to handle those people who mean the most to us, our closest colleagues. Here, skills don't help. Answers, but no method. Perhaps I can illustrate this paradox best by drawing on some examples from parenthood. In a sense, parenthood is a special case of management. Some years ago, to gather material for a book, I talked with a number of adults about the childhood, how they were parented. One question I asked was, as you think back over your childhood and the relationship that you had with your parents, can you remember any specific actions or events which you particularly value and which seem to you to have been significant to your development? Their responses were charming and often amusing, but it was hard to see how they could be helpful to a new mother or father looking for advice on parenting. The most important feature of their recollections is that they do not represent anything recognizable as a parenting technique or skill. Never, in all my interviews, did anyone ever mention an episode that might have been derived from a parent training manual. For the most part, they spoke of acts that parents did not do deliberately, something they thought would be good for their children's development. Rather, they remembered acts that had a spontaneous, even accidental quality, sometimes breaking all the rules. These moments were memorable because they were different from what the child was used to getting from the parent. We would construct theories about parental behavior from these responses, but we could not use them to develop techniques or specific how-to advice. But what about management? I realized, of course, that the relationship between boss and employee is hardly analogous to a parent-child relationship. But what if I asked people to remember specific incidents with their bosses? Would their responses be in any way similar? Well, I had to find out, so I began to ask everyone I met the same kind of question. You can guess the kind of answers that I got. Not once did any of my respondents cite an episode that they could have been learned in a management skill training program. In fact, most recalled behavior that would hardly be thought of as an approved management technique. They tended to be moments that the bosses were not likely to remember and would probably think were insignificant, yet often revealed something of the humanity of these bosses. In these incidents, the bosses may have exhibited spontaneity, genuineness, caring, but not skill. A dreadful world avoided. In both parenthood and management, it is not so much what we do as what we are that counts. What parents do deliberately appears to make little difference in most of the important outcomes, whether their children grow up to be happy or unhappy, successful or unsuccessful, good or evil. There's no question that parents can and should do worthwhile things for their children, but it is what they are that will really matter. For example, whether they are sensitive and caring or cold or indifferent. Most children will adopt the characteristics that define their parents, whether their parents want them to or not. Same dynamic occurs in management and leadership. People learn and respond to what we are. If you stop to think about it, perhaps that is the way it should be. What a dreadful world it would be if we actually did possess the skill to convey something other than what we really are. So, and that's the end of chapter 3 from The Management of the Absurd by Richard Farson, Paradoxes in Leadership. And it's all really rather trite. And if you stop and think about what he just said here, you can pick it apart rather easily in terms of skills and whatnot for the kids. If you don't have the skills to make enough money to put bread on the table, do you think that's going to have a difference on how your children are raised? If you don't have the skills to change their diapers, if you don't have the skills to provide the correct discipline, do you think that's going to make a difference in how they were raised? We've all known lax parents who have children that are bratty. So, but this book is, the reason I read it is because it came from the 70s, came out of the 70s, in which there was a whole host of books that basically told people that they didn't know what they were doing. They started usually with titles like, Everything You Know About Fill in the Blank is Wrong. So, everything you know about dating is wrong. Everything you know about parenting is wrong. Everything you know, in this case, about management is wrong, because you fail to take into the fact the inherent absurdity of management and of life in general. When in fact, life is not absurd, neither is management. It is occasionally counterintuitive, but not absurd. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate, just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.